Hello everyone. So things are slightly different today. Not different to be honest. Different is the new normal in that I'm not quite doing things as I ordinarily would. So everything's a little bit different from you. First of all, I know I think I mentioned this already. Look at how much my headphones are falling apart, but I just can't justify getting rid of them until they stop working, right? Like, as long as it can be fixed with duct tape, it's not broken. So what happened? Well, I have purchased a house. I now own a house. Well, myself and my wife now own a house collectively. The thing is, so I guess you guys probably know this. We've been living with my parents since we got married because we've been, trying to deal with the whole house situation. I was actually trying to think through why it is that it took us quite so long to buy a house. And I think that the basic answer is, okay, so it kind of makes sense. Okay, so here's the thing. We got married in July 2023, right? This is actually, the day I'm recording this, which is the day before this goes up, is our wedding anniversary. So isn't that interesting? We literally, to clarify, we bought a house today, meaning that today is our wedding anniversary and we bought a house. So yeah, the question is, why is it that 2 years after we got married, are we stopping living with my parents? Well, here's the thing. The first 2 months, we were actually in Canada on our honeymoon. So we weren't living with my parents. Then, the next time, the issue is that my wife still had to actually apply for a spousal visa. So she was allowed to live in the UK visa-free, but because she didn't have a visa, we can't buy a house yet. So that got us to December when we went to back to America for Christmas, and then only then, because we had to submit the spouse visa application in America. So we did that, and then we had to stay in America for 2 months. So that takes us to March 2024. And then now this is when it gets to a point of kind of unnecessary delay. Basically, to be perfectly honest with you, from March, because here's the thing, we first made an offer for this house in March 2025. So actually, there's a year that's kind of unaccounted for where we were sort of just, because of inertia, choosing to live in this house. Anyway, the point is, even though we bought the house, I maintain, my wife is of a slightly different opinion, but I feel like it's stupid to move in prematurely before, for example, because what I want to do is I want to make in this new house, a bespoke recording, editing, basically an office for me that has the very specific, it's basically designed exactly how I want it. And therefore I want to think that through. And I don't want to be having to put together a halfway, it's kind of okay, because I already have that, right? It's here. So what's the point in putting together another one? And the thing is, the very nature of doing that, I guess my attitude is, I want to delay moving in until I feel things are at least reasonably close to perfect, because otherwise, if we move in with things being good enough, I feel like that creates a sense of good enough is good enough. So that's where I'm at. Anyway, so don't expect me to leave this spot for the next few weeks. The big thing is so the place, this is you'll understand why I'm kind of saying this. The place that is supposed to be my office is actually much bigger than my office needs to be. I do not need all that space. So I've said, well, there's no upstairs bathroom in this house, which is kind of strange. And so every single time, and that's it is a bit weird to have a shower on the downstairs, which is what we have right now. But honestly, I don't care, because at the end of the day, we're going to go shower once a day. So who really cares? If we have to make that journey. But how can I put this delicately? Urinating, we're going to do that. It just occurs to me, this is probably not how I would usually frame it, but I can't be bothered. Urinating, we're going to do that several times a day, and it would be annoying every single time to go all the way downstairs. And it's I don't know, the house isn't huge, but it's kind of you got to go downstairs. By contrast, I have an ensuite there, That's how far, like, that's what I'm used to. And I drink a lot of water, so, you know, I'm really not about moving in before that. But even then, so, like, we could live with that. But the problem is, then I'd kind of have to be setting up my office with a space, like, knowing... But I couldn't set up the office, right? Not really, because I have to, like, I don't want all of my, like, stuff, like my technology stuff, in the same space where there's going to be builders putting up a stud wall and, you know, I mean, obviously, I guess once it's separated, that'll be fine. But, yeah, I really would just rather get that sorted. But obviously, you know, that's going to take a little bit of time because we want to actually, like, find someone, talk through with them, like, what's the plan? So, yeah, that's where, and that's why you shouldn't expect us to change scenery too much. But again, at some point it will, and that is exciting. Anyway, erstwhile, I will get this done. You know what I'm doing here. But yeah, basically the thing is, like, because like this is it's a whole load of stuff that's kind of hard to predict. It's messing with my productive drive, because, like, part of my productivity is about having a sense of, I know what I need to do and I have a specific plan to do it. And the problem is I can't really do that now because, like, I'm thinking about what I need to do, but, like, 50% of it is finding out 50% of the stuff I need to do is find out more stuff that I need to do anyway. So it's kind of just throwing everything all over the place, and that's why I'm not, like, recording this with the same get up and go attitude that I've had in the past. All right. We will jump in then.
If I see,
this is part 2. So obviously, you know, if you haven't seen part 1, go back and check it out. I will say, so essentially, well, I don't know. There's stuff I could say about, like, because I had, like, some thoughts going into this and, like, my expectations and stuff, but I already laid those out in part 1. But yeah, those still stand.
I actually do think there is a problem with trans women participating in sports as we have it right now, because the effect of the testosterone does give them an advantage over, you know, females who were born that way. But maybe our whole sports system needs to change. Maybe.
That's interesting. So it's kind of like that went from, like, kind of the moderate position to the much more radical position. It went from, like, the, yeah, pretty moderate. Yeah, actually, obviously, like, they have an advantage with sports. You need to be aware of that too. Hey, maybe we should completely overturn sports so they suddenly magically don't have this advantage.
We should do this based on, not based on gender, but on body mass, you know, bone density. On maybe we should have the categories as something besides male.
Yeah, so I've pointed out the issue of this, and I think it's, like, the essential issue. The problem with that is at that point you are explicitly establishing categorizations for the sports that basically reward the best bad people, right? So, like, and I know that someone can say, well, isn't that kind of how it works with boxing? Okay, yeah, that is the thing with boxing. And yeah, I can kind of understand how that is very similar, because you could say, well, you know, like, isn't, like, insofar as having a large body mass helps you with boxing and the power you're able to generate, isn't having the featherweight champion of the world sort of saying, oh, you're the best bad boxer, right? Because at the end of the day, you know, the featherweight champion of the world is going to get absolutely demolished by the heavyweight champion of the world. And I feel like that's why people often, like, it's very rare when you, like, imagine the iconic, I mean, I don't know exactly what weight Muhammad Ali was. He doesn't seem that huge to me, but it's very rare when people talk about, like, oh, this guy's the best boxer. You wouldn't expect them to be like, it's the middleweight champion of the world. No, they'd be like, it's the heavyweight champion of the world, because that's the point. It's the best. But the thing is, so for example, if we had levels of running based on how long you're, like boxing is the exception rather than the rule. If we had basically different leagues for runners based on the length of their legs, different leagues for basketball players based on their height, at that point, you're just taking something that is important for performing the sport well and saying, yeah, but what if we just, like, had a version of that sport where we account for the main variable that's going to determine how well people perform in that sport. And it's kind of like, at that point, you're sort of undercutting the point.
Cis women are amazing physically, you know, and I think that there's that a lot of transphobia is just rooted in the notion that cis women are physically inferior. And I don't see that in reality that I live in.
So this is the thing that people do where they, and it's very similar to like an anti-feminist talking point where someone might point out systemic issues women face, and then someone can say, oh, well, that's not empowering, because actually we should say that women have every single ability that men do. It's like, well, yeah, but the problem is when there's like actual issues women need to overcome, we shouldn't deny that. And actually, in a way, you're almost you're diminishing women's empowerment when you act as if there haven't been obstacles for them to overcome. And that's obviously to say nothing to the fact that in reality, the other thing you're doing is suggesting that it is offensive to women and that we're in some way like arguing that women aren't as powerful when we acknowledge that they are less physically capable than men. And by saying that, you are implying it would be offensive if they weren't as physically capable as men, which is a problem because they're not as physically capable as men.
Things that cis women trend towards excelling at over cis men, and I just don't think that that's a fair assessment of the situation.
Yeah, it's. Oh, by the way, there was also like a weird cut where it almost seemed like Bumblebee, like, I don't know, like it almost seemed like maybe there was a disagreement that they were inclined to like cut out, so they seemed like more of a united front, and like Bumblebee's kind of saying, yeah, I mean, look, the reality is that the real reason we should segregate men and women's sports is because they're men and women's sports. So men should not be competing in women's sports because then it isn't women's sports. And that's why, for example, when you look at things where physicality has nothing to do with it, like chess and, you know, like, I don't know, snooker, other like sports where, and even sports where women maybe have an advantage. I don't actually know off the top of my head of any sports where women obviously have an advantage, but even in sports where they would, it's still like a fact of the matter that there is a, like, historically women have not been able to play sports as much as men, and there is a stigma against women's sports. And it's simple. I mean, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but I had a thing where I was just checking the, you know, like what was on TV, and I saw, I guess, Euros, Switzerland versus, I was going to say Switzerland versus Sweden, it probably wasn't. Switzerland versus Norway, or whatever it was. And I was like staring at it like, what? But it's not the Euros. They only happen every 4 years, like 2020, 2024. The next Euros will be in 2028. The last Euros were in 2024. Wait, is that right? That is right, isn't it? Yeah. I'm just trying to think. I'm not confusing the Euros and the World Cup. But yeah. Yeah, the last Euros were 2024. So that doesn't make, and I was like so confused, and I was like thinking to myself, like, are they like doing a replay of last year? And I was like, but I don't think either of those teams were playing, or well, not either team were playing. I don't think there was this specific matchup last year. By the way, I don't think Norway was playing, but again, I actually don't think it was Norway. I think I'm just making it up. Anyway, the point is, I was so confused, and eventually I was like, I just need to click on it and see what it is. And you can probably tell where this is going. It's the Women's Euros. The Women's Euros are happening right now. I'm not going to pretend that I care about women's football. I think it would be virtue signaling for me to do that. Like, honestly, it's just the fact of the matter is that the men's competition is more prestigious. It's the thing that people care about more. It's the thing that I am used to having watching. And I don't care about football enough to be like watching a whole extra sex of the sport. So I watch the World Cup and the Euros religiously for the men's. I just completely ignore the women's football. I just don't care about it. And the thing is, whatever, like, you know, I think it's just a fact of the matter that women's football is never going to be as popular because it has historically been a men's sport, and you would need a whole load of people to decide to start caring about women's football just for the sake of caring about it, right? Because I don't think anyone could argue that it is in any way like superior to men's football. So it would have to specifically be choosing to go against the default. And that seems like a very unlikely thing to happen. So, the point is that when you like already have that sense of the sport isn't as popular, obviously that's going to make women less likely to play it. And that's something else that needs to be accounted for. So it's not just about like women's physical ability to play it. It's the fact that, I mean, and that kind of opens up the whole question about like women's footballers getting paid less. And it's kind of like, well, I mean, the problem is most people, like far, far, far fewer people watch women's football than men's football. So in terms of like the entertainment value, like brought to a certain number of people, you would have to say, well, surely they can't be paid as much, but yeah, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then the flip side there, is that there is like tennis where I don't think there is as much as like no one really, I mean, like what is Wimbledon's, obviously men don't play against women, but I believe I'm right that the sports happen concurrently. Again, I don't really follow tennis, or rather the two tournaments, like the men's tournament and the women's tournament happened at the same time, I believe. So yeah, and like Serena Williams, Venus Williams, I believe less so, but yeah, Serena Williams is considered a really famous tennis player, possibly more famous than like men's tennis players. I mean, yeah, maybe. I would say quite probably.
Okay, well, let's put up B.S. Lewis's comment, because he says, I don't think the Bible has much to say on sports, Jamie, but it does say a lot in terms of gender roles. You know, B.S., I don't think it's as strong on gender roles as you're trying to make it, although there are a lot of conservative Christians who are very,
Yeah, so the Bible on gender roles is actually really interesting because the main thing for it, I actually want to like just bust out the Bible on this. The main thing where this is relevant is Titus. This Bible like is falling apart, but that kind of makes me, it's kind of so you get a sense of achievement when your Bible is really kind of battered around because you're like, yep, thank you, I have been reading it. Okay, I know. So, yeah, the problem is this Bible has really thin pages, so I'm constantly overshooting where I need to turn to. But I literally like so much so that I was like really confused, thinking I had missed the book, but I just went over it. Yeah, okay, so essentially, I would say, I mean, maybe there's like there's other things about it to some extent, but the big chapter that's taken to be the like clear Christian teaching of gender roles is Titus 2, which says, But speak thou the things which become sound doctrine, that the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound, in faith, in charity, in patience, the aged women likewise, that they be in behaviour as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. Young men likewise exhort to be sober-minded, in all things showing thyself a pattern of good works, in doctrine showing uncorruptness, gravity, sincerity, sound speech that cannot be condemned, that he that is of the contrary part may be ashamed, having no evil thing to say of you. You know, actually, I thought there was slightly more there, and maybe I'm thinking about a different passage. I thought there was a passage that specifically said men should work outside the home and women should work inside the home, essentially saying that, yeah, the job of women is to be homemakers, mothers, domestic wives, while the job of men is to go out and work in industry or something like that. There's a really simple way to understand this this passage, I believe, which is that the Bible and Christian ethics in general is all about whatever it is that you are expected to do, whatever it is that is your role in life, you do it faithfully, because at the end of the day, if God thinks you should be doing something else, he will lift you out of that, as he did with Joseph, as he did with the whole of Israel during, the Exodus. But if he wants you to stay in that, maybe that's for a reason. And the worst case scenario is that you do what you're supposed to do faithfully, and you make a good impression of yourself as a Christian. So if you are a slave, that is your thing. You are a slave. So you be a bloomin' good slave. You be obedient. You do what your master tells you to do. You work hard. Because again, if you're not supposed to be being a slave, then something will happen. Like the abolition movement obviously brought many people out of slavery. There wasn't like individual slaves. They didn't really do anything to achieve that. Even like the, what was it called? Like the American Civil War. I mean, yes, there were slaves who ran away. And obviously, like, that's kind of the thing about like Christian ethics. You could say if everyone obeyed Christian ethics, then nothing would ever get done, because everyone would just be like sitting around like, oh, whatever happens, happens. But again, that's a moot point, because the reality is not everyone does Christian ethics. So who cares? And indeed, sometimes people go against Christian ethics, but that was still part of God's plan. Like obviously crucifying Jesus, for example, but many other such examples. So the point is that as such, you will be elevated out of a bad situation if it is a bad situation. And otherwise, you know what? It's not the worst thing in the world to just have to do what it is you're doing. And basically, as such, by doing what you're doing well, make people say, oh, that's really impressive that this person does that. And the thing that I would then say on top of that is part of that means that a lot of what the Bible is describing is very, or potentially very specific to the society that it is in the context of, right? So if the Bible says, hey, women, be good homemakers, does that mean every single woman from then on for all eternity needs to be a homemaker? No, it means that someone in a context where that was the thing that was expected of women is telling women to do the thing that they're supposed to do. And again, because we, like, obviously with slavery, we apply this logic, right? That doesn't mean that every single person who was ever a slave needs to constantly be a slave. We actually, in this society, don't have slavery at all. So, but obviously the point is, well, if you are in a culture where you have slavery, then those laws apply to you. So yeah, that's kind of, and I would say that's a very simple thing. And of course, we understand, because there are literally points in the Bible where it says, it describes people in certain situations they might not like, and says, be dutiful to that, even as Christ was dutiful to the cross. So the point is, like, Jesus didn't want to die on the cross. That was not a pleasant experience. That was not something that was fair. But in his specific situation, that is what happened to him, and he was faithful. So if you find yourself in a specific situation where you are in a culture where women are expected to be domestic, then you be domestic. But we don't live in that culture now. So that's basically my stance on the strict gender roles thing. The issue is when it runs, because in the case of, like, for example, me and my wife, it would be very irrational to do that, because I'm a really good cook. So, like, cooking's like a huge responsibility, right? So it would either be a situation where, and my wife has a really good paying job. So it's kind of like, is the Bible therefore saying, oh, I should go do like a job, and then like there's nothing about it that makes sense, right? Because like, this is the thing, I apply it to myself. I just think none of this would be rational if we said, oh, I need to go and be the one who is the breadwinner, and my wife needs to become a domestic woman, like basically just a domestic wife, and we need to raise a family on one income. Well, there's a fact, one, what I'm doing, it doesn't make a huge amount of money. Thank you, those who give on Patreon. But two, I would say it's quite an important thing to do, right? I would say that talking about this trans issue has a lot of value. I would be very, very surprised if someone's going to tell, like, if God exists, like, I know most people who watch this probably aren't Christian, but I'm sure you'd agree, if a God exists, it would be pretty ridiculous to say that what I'm doing right now is not my divinely ordained purpose. That if God exists, he didn't put me on earth to point out that trans identity is nonsense. But I think we can also agree if God exists, he recognizes trans identity as nonsense. So, like, that's kind of point one. Like, that seems contradictory. Then there's the fact, whatever I'm doing, like, there's no reason to think that anything else I could do would make very much money compared to my wife, who already has an industry that she's been working in for a long time. She makes a lot of money doing that. And then my wife would then have to learn to cook as well as I can, or else in the meantime, we maybe just wouldn't have as good meals. And then you think, like, oh, what's the alternative? The alternative is the way it works now, which is much better. So yeah, that's just to say that I think it's very unreasonable to read the gender roles in the Bible and take them as prescriptive, as saying this is how a relationship and a husband-wife situation needs to be, and if it fails to be like this, then you're bad Christians.
At one time, women did not have the same opportunities that they have today, but that doesn't mean that that's what God wants. So anyway,
yeah, I mean that's pretty much what I would say. That when you again, and the analogy I always make is that the Bible says women obey your husbands, but it also says slaves obey your masters. And yet Paul says, I can't think exactly where he says it. It might be Galatians, but I'm not sure. He says, if a man who is enslaved can achieve freedom, he should avail himself of the opportunity. So the point there is, and in Philemon, obviously Paul tells him to let his slave go, to free his slave. So the Bible is very clearly anti-slavery, but it's saying if you are in that situation, just because the Bible is anti-slavery doesn't mean that you get to shirk your responsibilities. So in the exact same sense, it would be perfectly consistent. Whether or not this is the correct way to read it or not, it would at least be logically consistent and have plenty of scriptural grounding to say that the Bible is not saying patriarchy is good. It is simply saying if you find yourself in a patriarchal society, you should be dutiful to those responsibilities, just as Jesus found. Because as Christians, we want to be like Jesus, right? Well, Jesus was condemned to die on a cross. Was that fair? Was that nice? Was that justice? No. But he was obedient to it anyway. So if we as Christians are supposed to be like Jesus, it logically follows that if you find yourself in a situation that's it's not fair, you don't like it, it's not just, but you're still obedient to it anyway. So yeah, like that is the, I think, perfectly consistent way to read it. And therefore, the Bible telling you to do something in a situation where you are like basically constrained by the expectations of society doesn't prove one way or another whether that is the overall way that's like whether or not the constraints themselves are good. Because if you were to read it that way, you would say that killing Jesus was the right thing to do, which of course it wasn't.
Yeah, but I don't even see how does that relate to transgender? Is it the...
And that's another good point, right? Because actually, even if you said all of this, you could, like, for example, I mean, Blair White would say, hey, I'm a woman and I am very stereotypically feminine. So actually, this isn't really relevant to trans identity. It's relevant to gender nonconformity. If you believe in traditional gender roles, hey, maybe you actually support trans identity. Maybe being trans is being the best Christian because you're so serious about what the Bible says. You're like, oh, actually, you know what? I am kind of feminine. I am kind of more like the way the Bible describes woman. Therefore, I must be a woman. Well, I mean, that's, at least you're not contradicting the Bible by saying that, right? I mean, technically speaking, you're saying I'm a woman and I behave like a woman should.
Well, I just don't say that there is the advantage in sports is a myth. I see that popping up in here. That's not what evidence shows. I know Rebecca believes that's what the evidence shows, but it's really not. And we have again tons of resources available to show that trans women compete usually struggle to perform against cis women. I'm just as far as the bathroom thing goes. Yeah,
I will say this, like the whole trans women usually struggle to compete against cis women, which was the comment there. The thing about that is I would imagine that most trans identified males are quite nerdy. So it's obviously, and the reality is we know, like no one's claiming that there are, like the lady ballers scenario is actually often happening. The point is that you would actually, like, I think the reason why we don't have a huge number of biological males just completely stomping biological females in sporting competitions is because actually the types of men who get into sports and the types of men who come to consider themselves women, there's not that much overlap there. I think that makes sense.
If a woman was scared to go into the bathroom because there was a black woman in there, would you think that that'd be a reason for there to be a separation between white and black restrooms? Just to clarify, like.
Well, yeah, so what's saying, if they have an advantage at sports, wouldn't this be a reason for separate restrooms, even though I don't really care? Okay, whatever. So, by the way, like, a lot of these comments seem to be like devil's advocate, because I would imagine this channel is small enough that they probably don't have a load of people who disagree in the comments. But anyway, like, clearly what it's saying there is about physical advantage. Like, if they have a physical advantage in sports, isn't that a reason why they shouldn't be in the bathrooms? And again, yeah, that is one reason, of course. You never want to... With trans identity, it's very important when you're arguing trans identity, you never say, isn't that the reason? Because let's be honest, with most of trans identity, it is so nonsense that there are usually several reasons why you shouldn't actually go along with it.
It's exactly what you said, Bree. You know, look, there are perverts in the world, okay? But why should we be... If we're afraid of perverts, why should we ascribe that to transgender people, right? They just want a place to be able to go to the bathroom. Like,
the bathroom. She kind of talks like Sarah Palin sometimes. She also says like it's like she kind of like really goes for it with the we had this there's this Canadian guy at my church. I'm really just dropping the religion thing all the time, aren't I? But yeah, there's this Canadian guy at my church, and he genuinely said, garbage. It's just garbage. Which makes me associate it with Canada. Like that kind of like, it's like really erring everything. It's almost like, I don't know. But like she's done that. I wish I could remember the exact things. There's been like moments where she's been talking and she's been like, transgender.
Ban public bathrooms.
I cannot walk in.
Oh, she said bathrooms.
It doesn't matter if transgender people are allowed to use your bathroom. If your kid goes into the bathroom alone, they're just as in danger, going into a child that's a boy.
Yeah, look, I think this is a good point. I do think the concern about like people being assaulted in bathrooms is overblown. Simply because, if nothing else, there is such a massive danger completely unrelated to the trans thing. Like if you're in like, it's kind of the way I pointed out is like, if there are a whole load of people around, well then a trans identified male isn't going to be able to assault you either way. If there's hardly anyone around and you're using like a bathroom in like a car park or something at night, then, well, a biological male could attack you anyway without needing to identify as trans. So, there's a very small number of scenarios where your risk of assault increases based on whether trans people are allowed in the bathroom. What is the case though is that the fundamental sense of privacy is undermined. That actually women, whether or not I present a physical threat, women would be completely justified to feel like they've been violated if I walked into a space where they think it should just be women. And of course, likewise, if it's a trans-identified male, based on the fact their concern is, well, I thought women should be in this place, well, they would logically have the exact same issue.
Prefer to use the female bathroom
because it's cleaner.
It's cleaner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually why I transitioned. I'm just gonna confess right now. It was because I was tired of those gross men.
I will say this: I've never actually noticed men's bathrooms to be particularly gross. I will say this though: when I was at an airport, in an airport bathroom, there was a guy close by, who was just farting like nobody's business. Like, it was insane. It was just like the whole time. And I was like, goodness me, dude. But again, I mean, I don't know what condition he left maybe all of his maybe once he left, the grossness left with him. But yeah, I will say that, in fact, actually, something I've said before is that whenever I eat out, I always like to make sure I have at least one wee in the tank, because usually I like to check out a place's bathroom. I kind of view like the, checking out the toilet as part of the eating out experience. I mean, not for like McDonald's or something, but like any kind of like a pub or something. I'm like, oh, what the bathroom? And sometimes you go to places that seem like, not even that fancy. You go in their bathrooms, just great. They got all the fancy soaps. They have like moisturizer. It's crazy. So it can really elevate my opinion of a place. But again, the point is the fact that it's even a possibility shows that the men being gross in the bathroom thing is overblown.
I like to go into the men's bathroom because there's no line.
Oh yeah, that's the flip side. Yeah,
like the women's bathroom.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But the men's bathroom never has a line.
Yeah,
that's true.
It's because it's because men don't have vaginas. It's kind of funny to acknowledge that the men's bathroom doesn't have a line, but not recognize the reason for that is very explicitly because of the biological mechanics of how men and women. Sorry, I did a little bit of a burp, but I'm just going to power through. Expel urine because it works differently. So that's why there's not a line, because men can usually get the job done a little bit quicker.
It's a double-edged sword.
Advantages and disadvantages to both, I suppose.
Oh, and also the way that men do it, because men can do it standing out. That means that you can fit in more of them.
In the resurrection, let's say, from the dead in the Christian theology of the resurrection.
Oh.
You could ask the question, like, someone might say, well, obviously God's going to restore somebody to their original sex or whatever. But at the same time, how do you operate when you have someone say, I think everybody would want
to I think this is a really interesting point. It's taking him a long time to get it out.
Say somebody who has like some sort of equality of being male and being female, like does God want them to be unisex or and then they
so look, the question being asked here is obviously in there's supposed to be a bodily resurrection in paradise, which will of course be on earth, and the like basically what he's asking is, well, hold on a minute, in this bodily resurrection, are people going to be resurrected in a trans affirming way? And of course, I mean, that's got to be something, because that kind of, in a way, it makes the question of, like, as a Christian who actually believes God exists, which again, let's grant these people genuinely do, they have to kind of be believing that God plans to raise them, I guess, as the sex that they want to be. But again, what he's saying here is, well, what about people who are non-binary, right? Like, what does God want for them? And I mean, it just seems like it's kind of already being trans is quite brazen in that you're saying like, oh, biological sex is wrong. But to then say like, actually, and God is on my side and God is going to fix this when he comes back, seems pretty confident, considering the Bible says at best nothing about this issue. But yeah, I mean, it does talk about like how, everything will be fixed. I mean, I guess I don't know if it ever like explicitly says that, disabled people will be resurrected, able to, not have those disabilities. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case.
It's like, is God going to restore that person to that state of affairs in the resurrection? Or was God going to like honor the thing that they decided to?
This is like, I will say he's like asking this quite simple question in an incredibly overly complicated way. All you need to do is say, are people in the final resurrection in the end times going to be resurrected in a way consistent with their original assigned sex at birth, if you like that term, or their trans identity?
If someone has both sex reasons to kind of go either way, let's say at birth, if that's the right way to operate.
Intersex is like, we would say different sexual element. What you mean is intersex. This guy's so bad at just saying words.
A certain way, and the person lives their life under that sex, and it works out for them well, or better than it would have the other way. Is God not going to honor that decision in the resurrection? Like, what's you do not need to keep saying like what.
That's like a really annoying thing people do. And I don't know if I do it. I don't know. I will say, by the way, someone's going to say, well, yeah, you do. I would say it's very different. Like, do I do it in conversation? I don't think I do. But people who've clearly explained their point before, like, literally, they don't even end their sentence with a full stop. They end their sentence with, like what I'm saying. So it's like they'll be talking and they'll be like, blah, 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 blah. So it's almost, you don't even get that opportunity to say, oh, yeah, I hear what you're saying, and here's a response. They literally just sit there, like, explain something forever. Yeah, I've known a few people in my time who, it's almost like they won't take "I understand" for an answer.
Way is God going to restore that person in the resurrection, and based on what? I'm not sure exactly. It seems like if someone chooses...
Look, if you're a trans-affirming Christian, I would surely think the answer here is obvious, which is, yeah, he is. Can you imagine being a trans-affirming Christian, but then thinking God's like, sucks to be a sucker. You're not being trans anymore, buddy.
Is to operate under a certain sex, and it could have gone either way, and it works out well for them. God's going to restore them to that sex, and then that has implications on someone might decide in other circumstances.
No, it doesn't. What are you on about?
How they operate under a certain sex. So it's weird. I don't know what you guys think about that sort of thing. You get what I'm saying? Hopefully.
What my response would be, I thought I understood what you were saying, but based on the fact that you tried to explain it, even though what you're saying I would think is the simplest thing in the world, maybe I don't understand what you're saying, because how could you have possibly managed to overcomplicate such a simple question?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead,
And,
Rebecca.
I mean, I have my opinion about this, but I can't, I can't guarantee that this is absolutely true. But
to be fair, I do appreciate that kind of humility, recognition that this is speculation. I mean, a lot of eschatology stuff is speculation. And one of my takes as a Christian is I do think sometimes, like, considering how much stuff there is evidence for, we allow to be debated, it's kind of weird that we then act as if stuff that has less evidence is not debatable. So things like people will debate the divinity of Jesus, even though there is a huge amount of evidence for Jesus' divinity. And yet, for stuff where there's like one or two verses that kind of imply it, people will act like it's a certainty. Like, it's always weird to me that people seem to treat like the Holy Spirit's divinity and the Holy Spirit's separate personhood as equally well established as Jesus's. And it's like, well, no, it's not. Now, I think probably the Trinity's right, but yeah, it's weird to me people conflate them. And yeah, it'll be other things like things to do with I mean, even like hell to an extent. Like, actually, there isn't as much stuff about hell as people act like there is.
has the identity of a woman, even if all of her body parts don't exactly fit with that, right? But God knows who Bree is, and Bree knows who Bree is. So I think God is going to, let Bree be who she really is.
Yeah, I would say the difference between this and like obvious physical disabilities is in those cases you can see that there is something clearly wrong with you, and therefore you can infer God's going to fix that, right? If you are blind, well, then you literally can't see it. But the point is, this is not how I'm supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be blind because everyone around me can see. But when you say, oh, I'm a biological male, I feel like I should be a woman, clearly this means that I know best, and God is going to put things like the way I'm actually supposed to be is a woman. The problem with that is you can't see any evidence of that around you. Like, yeah, you can see people have all sorts of physical disabilities, but you can't see that what you are physically is not what you're supposed to be.
If you're born a certain way, then you try to change, you're going against God's creation. Well, we know God didn't just, there's not just strict male and female, because there are people who have a variety of circumstances where they're not just male or female. So the biological reality does not fit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, no not true, but whatever.
It doesn't matter. This is not sinful that, then you'd be assuming that somebody is sinful for being born with a, certain body parts. But anyway.
Well, yeah, look, obviously there's a difference between saying that having the attribute itself is sinful versus the, I think, much more reasonable position of going along with it willfully and kind of allowing the, whatever it is to govern your life. Like, that can be different, because obviously there are many things that someone could say they were born with, but you still shouldn't, what's the word? Like, facilitate them, encourage them, reinforce.
So that doesn't really work. Where is the sin? Like, there's like something, and then you have the bearing false witness objection. Okay, you're bearing false witness about who you are. Actually, being transgender, what if you are actually telling the truth about
I will
yourself?
say, okay.
Hey.
Here's the thing about, like, the where is the sin, like, is it bearing false witness, blah, blah, blah. So I think the argument here is like, well, if something is not explicitly mentioned as a sin, then it is, it's not one, basically. But when you actually look, as I know many of you have, at the Bible, you would discover that Jesus says, there's two laws. Love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then he says, on this hangs all the laws and all the prophets. So the problem with that, though, is that obviously the love your neighbor as yourself, it's not a perfect logic, right? Because actually you could say, well, for example, that would not condemn sexual assault. Because I can say, I do love my neighbor as myself, right? I want to have sex with them, so I assume they want to have sex with me. So that's how, that's the thing, it doesn't work perfectly. And I think really what this is saying is, like, when it says love your neighbor as yourself, what it really means is love your neighbor. In other words, be a good person to your neighbor. And like Paul says that the law of God is written on the hearts of every person. So essentially what I'm getting at here is that, a lot of people think that the Bible is like an instruction manual, a bit like the Quran, where it tells you lots of good things and lots of bad things. And the things it describes as good, okay, you know that they're good. And the things it describes as bad, you know that they're bad. But the answer is actually that the Bible would not really be diminished in its utility and its purpose and its value if it contained not one single explanation of what is a sin and what is a good thing to do. Because we already know that. And what the Bible is actually saying is, you are a sinner, you know what is good, and you know that you have at times in your life failed to do what is good, or even actively done what is bad. And that is why you need Jesus, who did everything right, who never sinned, and was always behaving in the right way, always loving his neighbor, always loving God, and obviously he paid the price for your sin. That's the point of the Bible. So with that said, this question of, is transgenderism mentioned as sin? The question is actually, and a lot of people will think this sounds theologically liberal. It's not. It's a perfectly theologically conservative position. Is something a sin? Do you think it's a sin? Examine yourself and consider that. And I think for most people, they would recognize that actually, when you consider the fruits of trans ideology in society, that's why we can recognize that this is not something that's good. But yeah, the Bible does not have to mention it at all for it to be a sin. Because there's lots of things the Bible doesn't mention that are still sins, because we know they're bad things to do. And we don't need to even try to find, we don't need to construct some kind of logic where we say, oh, this particular type of thing is bearing false witness or whatever. No, if you engage in a way that demonstrates a lack of love for virtue, that's a sin. And obviously truth and honesty and integrity, these things are virtues that you are denying when you as a biological male claim to be a woman.
You know, this is who I really am. So you're not bearing false witness. You're actually telling the truth about yourself.
But of course, yeah, there is conditioned upon trans identity being accurate, which it's not.
We should be happy with the body that, you know, we are embodied. That's a good thing. But when the body is, there's an issue between the body and your soul, there's no reason.
So yeah, this kind of is like interestingly relevant to the whole Gnosticism thing, and I've heard people point this out. Gnosticism, like one of the things about it is this belief that flesh is evil, or like the material world is evil and the spiritual world is good, which is completely against Christianity. And but obviously people could like that and they could say, well, yeah, that's what trans identity is, right? The physical world, that's wrong, that's terrible, but the spiritual world, that's great. Right. So that's that. Like I said, I'm doing things slightly differently in terms of when I'm doing stuff. I am going to go and make some fish and chips. There we go. That's it. I don't think I've got anything to say really. So it was kind of interesting to look at this from a different perspective, and you know, I think like the idea of trans identity as like a proper religion makes sense. I think it doesn't work with Christianity. I've said before, and perhaps confused some people, I've said that I believe Christianity is a very materialistic or materialist religion. People say, well, you know, obviously. And, you know, I think the thing is, people don't understand when I'm saying that I'm being relative, right? Because people say, well, hold on, it's not, you know, so you're saying Christianity doesn't have a spiritual dimension at all? Well, obviously not. It's a religion. But the point is that, you know, you have in Christianity, like this idea of it all being about what Jesus physically achieved on the cross. And the fact that Christianity, unlike many other religions, does not say that the flesh is evil, that it actually says the flesh can be pretty good. And of course, you know, obviously, well, you know, there's things about the flesh there's things about the material world that need fixing, but we're not going to do that by like just completely abandoning the material world is the point. Anyway, but yeah, so it is interesting to consider